Welcome to the Is Office Ergonomics a Pain webinar. This is the 12th webinar in our Return to Work, Stay at Work series. We're glad to have you here today. My name is Tanya Hyde, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I'm the project manager with the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability, and this webinar has been made possible through the support of the Direct Access Program through the BC government. As I mentioned, my name is Tanya, and I'm moderating the session and handling the Q&A session. And our presenter today is Dr. Geoff Wright. He is the ergonomist for the City of Vancouver, where he provides technical advice and guidance on ergonomics to health and safety coordinators and managers involved in stay at work and return to work. Geoff has over 30 years of work experience in ergonomics and occupational health and safety, from starting the Ontario Ministry of Labour's program in ergonomics to executive positions with other occupational health and safety divisions, and with the Ontario's Workers' Compensation Board to principal consultant with Ergonomics Plus Incorporated in Toronto. He has a PhD in ergonomics, is a registered professional engineer in Ontario and BC, a Canadian registered safety professional, a certified professional ergonomist in Canada and the US, and is a fellow member of the Association of Canadian Ergonomists and the UK's Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. So he's very qualified to be giving this presentation today, and we're very glad to have him. I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Wright.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and welcome to the people that are joining the webinar. Thank you. I want to start by giving some context to my presentation, and obviously the purpose that I have for the webinar is to describe how ergonomics interventions match the worker to the computer accessories, and the workstation. The approach I'm going to be using, and I just want to flag for people, this is not what I consider a technical discussion. What I was hoping to achieve is to take you on a virtual office tour with myself as the ergonomist, and show you some of the things that, in my opinion, are occurring every day in workplaces and offices, and that from an ergonomics perspective can and should be changed to ensure that employees are not having the pain and discomfort that are all too often reported. So I will provide observations about everyday occurrences in the office environments and show examples of simple, easy to implement ergonomics interventions that have reduced pain and discomfort. So from my perspective, I feel the webinar would be relevant to anyone who is interested in achieving a pain-free office work environment, and that would include office workers, obviously the most important part of an organization, employers, labor representatives, health and safety professionals, healthcare providers, and return-to-work specialists as well, I believe, will benefit from some of the information that I will be providing, particularly the latter groups, because all too often you may, as a healthcare provider or a return-to-work specialist, not have the same opportunity to get out into the workplace to fully understand some of the situations that some of the employees you're seeing in a return-to-work mode are actually working in. Now, why can ergonomics help reduce pain and discomfort? Well, ergonomics is a systematic process in which the wide range of physical characteristics, cognitive skills, the abilities of individuals, and psychosocial factors are considered. And why do we want to do that? Well, we want to optimize the design and use of tools, devices, work procedures, and work systems. And obviously, when we do that, we don't want to have pain and discomfort occurring with employees that are using any of the tools, devices, work procedures, and work systems. So a simple definition I use for occupational ergonomics is the science of people at work. And I won't be covering the various sciences that are involved, but ergonomics is a very technical area of study, and I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. Ergonomics controls the risk of injury since it fits the task to the person rather than the other way around. So in other words, we need to be designing things for the person to use rather than designing something and then expecting the person to be able to use it without pain and discomfort. Now, there are some assists that help in applying ergonomics principles, and there are regulatory requirements for occupational health and safety. And we have people joining the webinar from many different provinces. Obviously, I'll be focusing on the province of BC only in the general sense of the regulatory requirements. Because here in BC we have WorkSafe BC Part 3, Division 3, which is general duties of employers, workers, and others. And those general duties apply universally across all provinces. And there's issues around joint committees and worker representatives. So again, there's nothing unique about that. In BC, we have a regulatory requirement for addressing musculoskeletal injuries. And WorkSafe BC's requirement is parts 4.46 to 4.53, and I'll show those in just a minute. The other really important aspect of any issue around health and safety is the importance of having commitment from senior management. And their everyday actions confirm that health and safety is essential for the success of the organization. And I know from my perspective, working at the City of Vancouver, there's been tremendous commitment from the senior management within our organization, and I know it is making a difference. I can see it, and I know that health and safety is being taken very seriously. I mentioned about WorkSafe's requirements. Again, these are fairly universal across most jurisdictions. There's a requirement to consult with the workers involved in doing the job. There's a requirement for musculoskeletal education. The ergonomics components really identify most with the identification, risk factor assessment, and risk factor control. And obviously ergonomists can do training, and we do evaluation, but the evaluation that's referred to in these parts is evaluation of how you are doing as an organization in preventing musculoskeletal injuries. Supporting these legislative requirements are many aspects that are being written by others, and that's by the Canadian Standards Association. And there's a series of standards they have, and one of them, of course, the overriding one is the Z1000, and that's, you will recognize as presenting the Plan, Do, Check, Act approach to health and safety. And they have different standards that fit in under that. One is Z1003, which deals with psychological health and safety in the workplace. And for those of you that are interested, you can actually get that document as a free download by following that link on the slide. It's a simple, easy one. If you do a search for CSA and Z1003, you'll actually find it. Their Z1004 applies to ergonomics in the development, design, use, management, and improvement of work systems. So as an ergonomist, that's probably one of the key standards that applies ergonomics to the workplace. A particular subset and standard that's being developed is the Z412. It's been out for many years. I've been involved. I've been very fortunate to be involved with the development of these standards over many, many years. We did a major initiative in 2000, and that's why Z412 is shown as 00. It has been accepted as lately as 2011, but there is a technical committee that has been formed that, again, myself and many other ergonomists are involved in, where there's a clear need to rewrite that guideline because technology has changed so much since 2000, as I'm sure you're all aware. So we are actually and will be rewriting the guideline on office ergonomics. It will become more of a standard, and we're hoping that we can get it out in the year 2015 as a written document. But time will tell, but we're making great progress on the technical committee, and we've only had 2 meetings, so I'm optimistic that we can meet that deadline. The other part, and we talked about the Plan, Do, Check, Act concept, continuous improvement is essential, and that's true for health and safety and everything. So, you know, we don't always, we want to get things right all the time, and we don't always achieve. So when something isn't quite right, this means we've got to continuously improve. And that's what you'll see in a lot of the situations I'm presenting as things aren't quite right, we have to improve and make them better for the employees. I mentioned about WorkSafe BC's requirements for identification, assessment, and control. And they have a general and comprehensive list of areas that you should be considering, and including physical demands, aspects of the workplace and workstation layout, characteristics of the objects handled, environmental conditions, and characteristics of the work organization. And these factors would be identified during an on-site assessment conducted by an ergonomist. I wanted to focus, though, on one of them, and that is on the physical demands, because personally I find that's very, very powerful in identifying most cases where an office worker is reporting musculoskeletal discomfort. And the 5 factors in the physical demands are force, repetition, duration, awkward postures, and contact stress. And I can't emphasize enough that if you just remember those 5 physical factors, very, very often you are, in fact, able to figure out why someone is reporting signs of pain and discomfort. So in an office job, the common risk factors would be translated as awkward postures of the body, holding one posture for long periods of time, that's duration, contact with hard or sharp surfaces or edges, that's contact stress, forceful movements, and I combine that with repetitive tasks, and insufficient or inappropriate breaks. And we will be giving some examples. I won't be going back to those 5 common risk factors that we just discussed, but keep them in mind when I give some of the examples that you'll see later, because they do come up. They're the hidden undercurrent in the examples given. The symptoms that are reported, and many of the people out in the listening in on the webinar are probably more aware of the symptoms than I am, but generally the list is not unique to many situations, and that in some ways makes it very difficult to decide if in fact the pain is being caused by the workplace or whether there are some other underlying symptoms that are causing those discomforts. In an office environment, the other things that makes it tricky is that signs and symptoms often develop gradually over time. It can take months or years. Signs or symptoms may appear suddenly with a change in furniture, software, job demands, or equipment. And sometimes an example of something happens suddenly is when there's a requirement for overtime. So you're working on your regular hours for the day, and then all of a sudden you have to do a prolonged or concerted period of overtime. That's a typical time where signs and symptoms are going to appear. And they can also increase during periods of uncertainty or change. If there's more stress within the organization because there are going to be significant changes, that makes everyone a little more tenser and in fact increases the reporting incidence of musculoskeletal discomfort. The important thing is that these signs and symptoms helps you and everyone else understand that you've got them, because then something can be done about it. So you do need to report your signs and symptoms of discomfort as soon as you notice them. Now there are some warnings that I have to give. And this, I would say, I consider a pretty important slide, because I often still don't believe some of these points myself, but I know they are happening. Many more workers have aches and pains from working on a computer as have injury claims. And quite often I will go out into work sites and you can talk to people, talk to the employees, and they will tell you that you're getting aches and pains. One of the interesting things is that about an estimated 95% of workers with musculoskeletal discomfort don't report their discomfort. And often when I'm out doing assessments, I'm amazed to find that office workers are taking medication to work through the pain. And as an ergonomist, I find that particularly upsetting. And the other interesting thing I find as an ergonomist is the workplace setup is usually the last to be identified as a possible cause of the discomfort. So if someone's telling you they're getting an aches and pain, they have many, many possible explanations of the cause. But the most overlooked factor is being in an office environment for 8 hours a day. And yet seemingly small details in that office environment could be causing the discomfort, and yet the employee just doesn't realize the importance of reporting it. Because the sooner the signs and symptoms of discomfort are reported, the sooner interventions can be implemented. Signs and symptoms in the workplace I deal with most often are sore legs, tingling in the feet and arms, sore hands, wrists, or arms, neck and shoulder pain, soreness or redness in the eyes, headaches, and back pains. So the rest of the webinar will actually be looking at possible situations that could be occurring in your workplace where these types of symptoms would be reported. Now, both buildings and employees and the employees inside them come in many different sizes and shapes, and we always have to keep that in mind. So not all offices are the same, and not all employees are the same. And in fact, discomfort doesn't depend on size. Now, I don't know if any of you will recognize this slide. Obviously, it's of a wedding. The gentleman makes the female, his bride, look quite petite. But for those of you who don't know who this is, the female is 5'7", and the picture of her husband is in fact a picture of the world's tallest man, who is 8'3" in height. Now, we don't have that range in many or most workplaces, but there is a considerable range in heights. At the city of Vancouver, our shortest employee is about 4'10" in height, and I have a tall employee. It's not unusual now for people to be 6'6", 6'7", and you do have to accommodate that range of sizes. Now, the question I wanted to start with is, are office task chairs a cause of musculoskeletal discomfort? And I'm very traditional in how I like chairs being set up, and most ergonomists are pretty close to trying to achieve the goal of, you want to have the seat height at the correct height so that you can get a 90-degree angle for the legs. You want the upper arm hanging down at the side of the body with a 90-degree at the elbow, and that's where your finger height is where the home row of keys should be. And in fact, the top of the screen should be level with the height of the eye. So there are certain features in many office workstations that allow that to happen and to be achieved. And that's really sort of the starting point for some of the slides that we'll be following. Obviously, having a good task chair is important. And the chairs that are out in the marketplace today are generally have a lot of nice ergonomic features in them. And I will be covering later some of the features that I feel are particularly important when selecting a task chair. But you can't just think about the task chair. You have to think about where it is being used. So you may have the best ergonomic chair that is out in the marketplace, and if you give it to an employee and there's too much thickness in the work surface, then it's impossible for them to achieve the recommended seated position for keyboarding. There are many other things that happen with chairs, and pressure under the legs that causes discomfort is one of the fairly common occurrences that I run into. People don't realize the importance of getting that set to the right height, or in fact that the legs need to be supported at a higher height. Some people know that intuitively, and this is just a fun picture I put in. It's a lifeguard, and obviously they realized they would be getting contact stress underneath the back of their legs, and they took their own remedy for elevating their feet so that that source of discomfort was eliminated. If you're at a high counter, you may have to build your own footrest, and it's always a challenge. Footrests are challenging. I believe that the purpose of a footrest is to basically replace the floor that you can't put your feet on, so I'm very strong on the point that a footrest should be solid. It should provide solid, firm support for the feet. Now, you also have to consider short employees, and one of the important features in a chair is the depth of the seat pan. And people generally, when you talk to them, like psychologically to feel that the whole underneath side of their leg is covered by the seat pan. But from a biomechanical point of view, you don't need a lot of support in that last part of the leg, and in fact you want to be particularly careful about putting any pressure on there, so that's why there's a waterfall edge. But you always want to make sure that there is clearance between the back of the leg and the seat pan. So short employees generally not only need a footrest, they also need a chair with a shorter seat pan, and you can see in this picture here that there is a difference in the seat pan between these two chairs. I mentioned about some of the features that I consider particularly important in task chairs, office task chairs. And one of the interesting developments, in a way, is that the chair manufacturers are now coming out with chairs that move with you. And I'm undecided, in my own opinion, about whether that is a good feature or not. But I do know from the time when I was in Ontario working on return to work, and also from my own experience, when people are reporting symptoms of discomfort, I really do feel that the more traditional ergonomics posture is the one that works best. And so in order to achieve that, I have to have a task chair that is going to have a certain number of ergonomic features. So I'm looking for a backrest, which obviously has an outward curve to match the inward curve of the spine. And I do believe lumbar support is so important. That's probably one of the most important features in a chair. When you do have lumbar support, you want to have adjustment in the height of that lumbar support. And you also want to have adjustment in the angle of the support of the backrest. I will be talking more about a tilt lock mechanism, but if you're in that recommended ergonomic posture, you want to be in an upright posture, and that really requires a firm backrest. Adjustment in the depth of the seat pan, as we've already mentioned, is important to accommodate employees with different leg lengths. And armrests that are adjustable in height and width is also a feature that I look for when people are in and have reported pain and discomfort, because I usually find that if the chair has not either been adjusted properly for the individual, or if the chair doesn't have some of these features, then that's much more likely that I will be getting from them reports of discomfort. Pain and discomfort occurs from contact stress, and you'll notice in this picture the person keyboarding, but you'll see that very sharp edge on the keyboard platform. I've actually found and come across some employees that have been in excruciating pain, and it's usually because there's a very sharp edge in their workplace. It's a very simple problem to solve, and in fact one of the industry norms is to have a rounded 3mm edge to reduce the contact stress. And you can see here that that's a 3mm vinyl rounded edge. And that will eliminate the cause of discomfort that would have been reported in that previous slide. We often find sore hands, wrists, and forearms. It's not an uncommon occurrence. In fact, I was looking at the newspaper just this week and found, and it's unusual to find it being reported in the newspaper, but the headline was, "Toronto woman injured while typing." And she was creating profiles, and it required an enormous amount of keyboarding, and she developed severe pain in her wrists and forearms. She alleged that the company ignored her complaints and her request for a wrist rest. And obviously the consequences for her were quite severe, because the pain soon made it impossible for her to do her job, and she's been unable to work since 2011. That she remains seriously disabled in many, if not all, aspects of her life. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I don't want to talk about the claim, I just wanted to talk about wrist rests, because we have to be careful about our requests for wrist rests. I referenced two studies here by Dr. David Rimple in the work he's done. He's done some, I think, absolutely amazing scientific research on looking at the causes of discomfort in the hands and wrists. One of the interesting things, and the reasons why I put in the slide, is you'll notice that repetition and the increased pressure in the carpal tunnel is not great from repetitive typing. But it's that wrist extension that goes to 25 degrees that actually really did increase more significantly the amount of pressure in the carpal tunnel. And then the force for the pinch and different pinch grips, which I'm not going to be talking about, is another factor that he identified. Now, one of the other studies he did, and again I consider this very significant, is you want to be very careful about the pressure that you put between on the soft tissues between the palm of your hand and the first 4 inches of your arm. And that's, of course, when you turn your wrist over and take a look at it, you can see blood vessels, and there are nerves that run through there as well. And that increases the pressure on carpal tunnel. So I wanted to just relate those two studies to the question of wrist rests, because you can see here within many workplaces, I'm not. Some people like wrist rests and some don't. In front of a keyboard, it's good to have a wrist rest because that does help you keep that wrist into the more neutral position for your wrist, and that's about plus or minus 10 degrees. But the concern is when that wrist rest goes in front of the mouse. And in fact, ergonomists, we don't like the term wrist rest because it should be called a palm rest. And this individual is obviously supporting the palm of her hand. The part you want to avoid any pressure on is that 4 inches from the palm back. But invariably what happens when you start moving the mouse, your hand will start moving forward, and then very likely you will be putting pressure on that 4-inch section of your arm where you want to avoid any pressure. So for that reason, I am okay with wrist rests or palm rests in front of a keyboard, but I don't like them in front of a mouse. One of the other parts of a chair that I think has really been misunderstood, and I even today run across cases where the tension control knob has not been tightened properly. And so that's why I put in this comment that this control is not understood. And one of the reasons that it's not understood, you'll notice here there's the tension control knob. I actually chose this particular chair because it could show the chair and the tension control knob. Usually it's hidden underneath the chair and it's very hard to get a picture of it. But when you need to adjust that knob, a lot of people don't realize. They may turn it just a bit. And in fact, on the newer chairs, they've improved that whole tension control so that in fact a very few turns of a rounded dial, not a knob, as we show in the picture, actually does have a tremendous effect in increasing the amount of tension on the backrest. But when I do my worksite assessments and find that there isn't enough pressure on the backrest, I turn the chair over, and I literally have to turn that knob for about 20 seconds. What you have to do is compress the spring that's holding that backrest, and that requires a turn of about 20 seconds. And I'll guarantee you that very, very few people realize that, and it makes a tremendous difference in the comfort that people feel when they're getting support from the back of the chair. Now, what happens if you don't get the support in the back of the chair? You often end up in a posture like this. And it may not be your back that's going to feel the discomfort, but it, in fact, is probably going to be your arms because you're reaching out. I actually had a very interesting case where a lady went on vacation for about 6 weeks. It was her honeymoon, and she came back, and of course the position was filled temporarily, and the person that had used her chair had, either on purpose or inadvertently, taken the tension control lock off it. So that chair didn't have enough tension control, and she was getting severe discomfort in her arms, and to the point where she had to go and have treatment from her physiotherapist. She finally contacted me, and I came up and took a look, and in about 3 seconds it was evident that there wasn't enough tension on that backrest, and we tightened the backrest, and it sort of immediately made a huge, huge improvement for her. So I'm still running into situations like that today. I had one just the other week where the people have changed offices. They go to a different workstation. There's a different chair there, and there may not be sufficient tension for them, and then their arms start getting into discomfort. So it's the extra reach that you really have to be careful. Obviously, reaches near shoulder height cause discomfort, especially when done repetitively. And I put this just as an example because I wanted to illustrate the differences of the types of tasks. But the general principles apply, that you want to have the table height at just slightly below elbow height. And of course, if you have employees of different height, that makes that quite difficult to achieve. So one of the solutions is to provide an adjustable height table. And here you can see an employee is in fact adjusting the height of the table. And here are the employees of 2 different heights. And you'll notice that the shorter lady is able to do the work that she's required to do, which is stamping, at the height where it wasn't injuring her shoulder. Before, she was getting a lot of discomfort in her shoulder because the table was too high. You have to be careful because it's not just table height that's important, and you can see in this slide here, it's you've got to consider the surface and how you can get to that surface, because if you're reaching, that's also going to lead to discomfort, and particularly I would say discomfort in the back in that particular situation. Holding a telephone can lead to discomfort, and it's fairly common practice these days for people to have a telephone headset. That's especially important when people are on the computer and the phone at the same time. It's all too often people decide they're going to cradle the phone between their shoulder, they raise their shoulder, bend their neck, and it doesn't take long to start getting discomfort. Now, I've talked about my preferences for the ergonomic posture, but there are many examples where the recommended posture is not achieved, and some of them are in many ways beyond the control of the employee, and in other cases they have some control. And I just wanted to highlight some of those issues. Here's an issue where the screen, person using a laptop, it's too low. Sometimes, and I'm not going to talk a lot about screen height, I did mention that the top of the screen and your eyes should be level, but corrective lenses change that position. So in some cases, depending on the type of corrected lenses they use, that they actually do need it to be lower, because then they're not raising their neck up. So if they're just using standard corrective lenses, not progressive lenses, for example, or not bifocals, then what you want to do in a situation like this is to raise the laptop screen and use a separate keyboard and mouse. Keyboards are notoriously bad from an ergonomics perspective because you can't get the screen at the right height and keyboard at the right height. You have to change one or the other. The easiest thing, least expensive thing to do is use a separate keyboard and a mouse. So this was a quick fix we did, and you can see here that we raised the screen and added a separate keyboard and mouse. And that actually makes it, from a postural perspective, much, much better for the employee. There are many other cases we've put in. I put this in as sort of obviously a historic case, but because we don't have CRTs anymore. But people still will place their LCD screens over to one side, and that will cause discomfort and neck discomfort. And one of the themes that I'm going to be talking now about is twisting, because twisting in the office causes discomfort and pain. So I threw in a twist. We all remember, hopefully, Chubby Checker at some point, or have heard him and watched him. The interesting thing about how he worked, and this is why I'm relating it to the office, is when you're twisting, you want to be moving your legs. You don't want to be twisting your upper body. And so the examples I'm going to be showing are where people literally are twisting their upper body, which is leading to pain and discomfort. And this is one of the examples I have here. The placement of the documents on the left side of the work surface, and the person is right-handed, you can see that they're twisting and they're going to be getting neck and shoulder pain. The solution here, this is an L-shaped workstation, is actually quite simple. If you add a corner maker, it increases the usable surface, and you can put documents right in front, so that person no longer has to twist. Twisting also comes up when we talk about using the mouse. Arm and shoulder pain can occur when you reach up to the mouse. The mouse should be next to and at the same height as the keyboard. And in this situation, you can see that with the mouse being placed over on the right-hand side and we have the extended numeric keypad, we actually have an extended reach to get to the mouse. And that does cause pain and discomfort, particularly in more petite females, just because the reach proportionally is much larger for them. From an ergonomics perspective, and you want to make sure that where you usually do your work is within that immediate zone of 25 centimeters. And what's interesting, with an extended keyboard, the mouse typically ends up out in the occasional work zone. And that's why we do get signs and reports of discomfort. One of the things that I'm doing in a fairly concerted effort, it's not an ergonomic solution in the sense that it's in part asking the employee to change rather than us changing the design. But you'll notice by putting the mouse on the left side, that allows an even reach out to the numeric keypad, which incidentally not many people do use that often. And with your left hand, you have the same level of reach to the mouse. This intervention works particularly well with people that are right-handed writers, because now you can write and look up information without having to put your pen down. So I'm very strong on suggesting to right-handed, and in fact challenge people, if you're a right-handed writer, well, you should be mousing with your left hand. A lot of left-handed mousers, a lot of left-handed writers actually mouse with their right hand, and it took me a long time to figure out why, and that's why I finally focused in on the pen. The other thing that does happen, and which saves some people from not having to try the challenge of mousing with their left hand, is if you use a lot of hotkeys. They're always usually and typically on the left-hand side, so people do find that they're not using the mouse as much, and there the advantages of mousing with the left aren't as strong. And the other option is, again, getting a keyboard that doesn't have that extended numeric keypad, and then you can put the mouse on the left or the right. This person is right-handed, so they've put the mouse on the left so they can write. And that's obviously a good intervention as well. There are some keyboard platforms that aren't wide enough to accommodate both the mouse and the keyboard. And so then the keyboard ends up on the main work surface, which, as we've already mentioned, leads to discomfort in the arm and shoulder. Interesting, there's some examples of postural discomfort being caused by visual discomfort. And the example here is such as a glare on a window. There's actually a glass partition here. But these sources of glare that you're seeing are actually caused by a skylight that's behind the individual, and it was reflecting. And in fact, they were leaning to one side to avoid the discomfort from that reflected glare that's coming off the window in front of them. Another source of the visual discomfort is overhead light fixtures. In most offices, we're still using overhead light fixtures, and there are some interventions that need to be considered. And one is obviously making sure you don't have that direct source of glare, and that does lead to visual discomfort. So there are egg crate louvers you can put in there. There are acrylic panels. In some cases, some people have a creative flair and chose their own solution, and in this case, they solved the glare problem by putting in photographic diffusers. Glare comes from other sources as well, and this is a paper document stand that we use, but it's made out of clear plastic. And again, you can see a lot of reflected glare off there. And you'll actually see this is the egg crate type louver. These are great at stopping glare from a distance. They're not a problem as long as they're not in your direct view, but they work effectively from a distance. The closer you get to them, the closer you look up in and see the lights. So you actually have to put an acrylic panel over that if it is in the line of sight. In this case, with the document stand that is put between the keyboard and the screen, I just recommend putting extra sheets of paper on there so that there isn't that source of light. You'll also notice that up here, depending on your seated eye height, you may in fact be getting direct glare from the overhead bin that is when the light is turned on in the overhead bin. And so a simple solution there is to create a paper valance, and that's what this person did, and it is very effective at stopping that source of glare. One of the puzzles to me is how people can work with such unbalanced light levels that leads to visual fatigue and discomfort, and from an ergonomics perspective, levels at this point are just not recommended. Personally, I like to see between 500 and 1,000 lux when you're working with paper and on a computer. Another source of glare was actually someone looking at these white plans on a desk, but there was a skylight overhead, and it was very, very intense for them. They were up about 5,000 lux because of it, and so you can get many different and varied sources of glare. We mentioned about the top of the screen should be level with the eyes, and again, a historic slide because it really illustrates some of the problems. That clearly would not be an ideal setup. But I put it in just to ask in a general sense to people in the webinar, are you purchasing height adjustable LCD screens? They do come as height adjustable, and that is a feature that you do want when you're purchasing an LCD screen. These days they're making them larger and larger, and if you're the only user of that screen, you can use some form of monitor block to raise it up or get it to the right size for you viewing it comfortably. One of the other issues is where are we positioned, because more and more people are getting two screens. And it really depends on whether one is just primary, and if this was a secondary, it would be moved more to the side. Or in fact, if you use the two screens equally, you want to make sure that they're both centered in front of you. Because in the earlier days, it would be an LCD screen and a document holder, whereas now so much of our information is on screens, we just use two LCD screens. I wanted to, and I'm close to wrapping up, but I want to talk about back pain because I know it's a huge issue for everyone, and it's a very, very frequent occurrence. You'll notice in this example of using a laptop, this laptop is something that I often use this as an example. It's what I call the laptop position. You can't sit for very long using a laptop with your forearms being supported on a surface, which many people do because they're trying to get to the keyboard, and bending forward like that. That causes very quickly pain and discomfort in the back. In fact, I gave a presentation to a smaller group, and the majority of the people in that audience were using laptops. And so I asked them, you know, how many of you are getting back pain? And 80% of them were getting back pains, and it was quite acute. And it was because they were using their laptops. So we had talked earlier about that intervention. Get a separate keyboard and mouse, raise the height of the screen. That goes a long way. Now, you can end up in what I call the laptop position even when you're working with paper and a keyboard. And people will put papers in front and then go into that laptop position when they're working on it. Very, very uncomfortable for the back. Anybody who has had a back pain will not be able to go into that position for more than about 5 minutes. So I wanted to give some other examples of twisting because it does occur quite often in the workplace. And here you can see a lady reaching for the printer, and that's definitely reaching and twisting. So a simple intervention is to reach with the left hand. I mean, that dramatically reduces that postural twisting. And the better option, if you can do it, is when you stand and reach with your left hand. They could reach with their right because there's space to move down, but if they're doing it efficiently, they can just reach with their left hand. One question when you look at this slide that you ask is, why is the monitor not centered? And in fact, it was put that way for a reason, because they wanted to talk to the clients when they came to the work surface. So the person working on the computer was deciding that they would twist, whereas the people that were standing there didn't stand there for very long. So a simple intervention allows you to influence and change that outcome by simply moving what was on the work surface before and adding a plant. It was possible to get that situation totally eliminated, because now people are forced to stand directly in front, which is where you would like to be centered to be able to speak to the person, because that way you're not twisting. Twisting also occurs in workplaces for other reasons as well. You have to look at how much space is available. When you have a chair, you want to make sure there's enough room to get the armrests and the chair fully into the space. And you can see in this case, this individual was twisting because of the position of this filing pedestal. It was an easy problem to solve. It was a mobile one. We just had to take it out and put it on the other side of the desk. And then when they're working on their paper documents, they can be centered. This is a bit of a rhetorical question, but is an exercise ball a good idea in the office? My view of that is they're not, and they shouldn't be used in an office. That being said, I know there's one employee in particular that regularly uses the exercise ball all day long, and she's very happy, and so it's a situation that she's finding is working for her. In general, though, I do not want exercise balls in the office. We should be providing a chair, and these days, of course, we're able to look at different options. If it's a case of acute back pain, the individual may want to stand for just a few weeks, and so sometimes we can, as you can see here, we just use the box and put the keyboard up there and raise the height of the screen, and they were able to stand during the acute stage of their back pain. Some chronic back pain users want to stand all the time for computer work, and this workstation was set up so they would do their computer work here, and then when they had their paperwork, they would go and sit down at the side work surface. And some people just make a habit of standing standing all the time. They like that, and that's fine too. And they actually had a particular stand built that allows them to do that. And of course, some have their own preferences. But I think most of us would like to alternate between sitting and standing. And that's just illustrating here. These are height adjustable workstations, and it allows you to properly adjust the height for both seated and standing work. Obviously, just showing the range here, both workstations can move up over that range. You do have to be careful with the range for sit-stand workstations, because if you have very tall employees or very short employees, you may need to make sure that that workstation does cover the range that they need. Now, in wrapping up, I just want to quickly address two issues that are coming up for the future. As we move forward, we're finding an increased use of tablets. This can be problematic because often the expectation is that the user will hold or cradle the tablet in their arms. And the results of a study that Dr. Richard Wells at the University of Waterloo has done, it's about to be published, is that holding a tablet for a very short time, about 11 minutes, is very tiring on the arm. And when you think about how someone might be expected to use a tablet, 11 minutes doesn't give you a lot of time to be using a tablet with an unsupported arm. So you need to make sure that you're not holding that tablet for very long. I've heard of one anecdotal situation where I think a medical physician wanted to use tablets and take the information with them from office to office, and they started carrying the tablet with them. And very quickly, after a week or so, they realized, no, I can't do that, because over time their arms were getting fatigued. So you need to find a way to work on the tablet without supporting it only with your arms. And there are some suggestions for using a tablet. If you do have to carry it, you can use a bag to carry it. You want to make sure that you do not hold that tablet for very long. And as we've already mentioned, the limit is about 11 minutes for holding it, and then your arm becomes very fatigued. So you have to put the tablet down whenever possible. You have to evaluate how it is used. And by that I mean, what are we asking the person to do, the employee to do with this tablet? Is this a reasonable thing to be asking them to do? And you may have to modify how the work tasks are being performed with that in mind. And you may want to consider whether, in fact, a tablet cart can be used. And there are tablet carts that are in existence. And that might be a possible solution depending on what particular nature of the work tasks you are performing. The second issue that's futuristic of sorts, although it's not, because mobile offices have been around for a while. This individual is using a typewriter, and not many of us smoke these days either. Classic reporter, and this was his mobile office. We are running into situations where we have mobile offices, and you can see again why I'm going back to that theme of avoid twisting. Because depending on how much time you're spending in the vehicle, you are going to be twisting, and you're going to be twisting your upper body. And so if you're just making a quick data entry in there, that may be fine. But if you're having a more prolonged period of time, we obviously have to address this issue. And what's interesting, I've got an example here, but when you think about an owl is very good at moving its neck. It doesn't turn its body or its feet, it moves its neck. So really that's the concept that I want to apply and see about what we can do in mobile vehicles, because we're actually planning a trial of a wireless keyboard. And you'll notice on this keyboard it has what is probably going to be a good feature, because you wouldn't have a good surface for using a mouse in a vehicle. So we had our IT department spec out different keyboards, and they've located this one where we've got the tablet on activated for the mouse on the side, and that would allow the person to have the keyboard in front of them, and then all they're doing is turning to look at the screen rather than twisting with their upper body. As I say, we're just planning a trial. I have no idea how successful it's going to be, but it's consistent with that other theme that I mentioned about the need for continual improvement, and so I'm hoping that this is one way that we can improve the situation. In closing, I just want to emphasize that rest breaks are important, but as you probably hear all the time, we don't have enough time, and that's a very familiar excuse. But it's important to keep in mind that there's no loss of productivity if employees stand up every 15 to 20 minutes, and each hour take a 3 to 4 minute break that includes a walk. And obviously when we have in our workplace people that are suffering from back discomfort, I really emphasize the importance of this, and in fact would in a case like that suggest they stand up and walk every 15 to 20 minutes in the acute stages. So my question to the audience is, did you stand up during this webinar? And don't worry if you didn't, but first comes awareness, then comes the change. So in conclusion, I would add that if you doubt the validity of some of these and the occurrence of some of these points that I've been raising during this virtual tour, take a tour of your worksite with an ergonomist. You can contact an ergonomist through the Association of Canadian Ergonomists. There's probably much more to cover, so now's the time in the remaining to ask a few questions.
Great, thank you very much. We don't at this moment have any questions, so if you, those of you who are online, want to go ahead and submit some, then that would be great, and we can have Dr. Wright address them. And if people end up not having any, then we might end a little bit early, unless there's anything Dr. Wright wants to cover. We'll give just a minute for people to submit questions. We have one that was just submitted. What is your opinion of the roller mouse?
The roller mouse, yeah. When we specify a mouse for where I work, City of Vancouver, we got what we call a universal mouse. And a universal mouse is one that's straight, and it's the conventional mouse. And the reason we need to have a universal mouse is that we have people, as I've pointed out, switching between right and left hand. There are many other options for a roller mouse. So I think an individual may have their own preferences. I'm very, very cautious about any different type of mouse. In the early days when we used to have trackballs, and which was basically an upside-down mouse, there were cases of discomfort in the hands from using something like that. Now the roller mouse, it depends on which particular one we're talking about it, and there are some people that like them, so I'm not discouraging it. I'm just putting a great big caution flag on it and just thinking that you need to be very, very careful about using something like that. And also I would point out that most of these other alternate types of mice are only for the right hand. And in my view, there's huge, huge benefits of mousing with the left hand. And, you know, for example, I'm now insisting that anybody who has got back pain in our place seriously try mousing with their left hand, because I want to keep them balanced and centered. I do not want them twisting. And so if I had to choose between a roller mouse and them having an extended reach to get to it, I would be very concerned about it. So I don't think I could add that much more. These situations are unique, and there are people that use them, are very loyal to them, and very happy with them. So I'm not trying to discourage that. I'm just sort of challenging in a bit of a way to to be careful and think very seriously about what it is you want to achieve.
All right, I have two questions that I think are somewhat correlated. One was asking about the split keyboards, and another one is asking about what your thoughts are on placing the keyboard in a negative tilt to encourage placing the wrist in a neutral position.
I'll take the second question first because it's the easiest to answer. A negative tilt, from an ergonomics perspective, a negative tilt is the correct position. When you look at your hand and your fingers actually come down below your wrist, so rather than tilting a keyboard up, you actually, if it's tilted down, it is actually less stressful on the wrist. And I would actually turn the question the other way around. Continually, I'm reaching underneath keyboards and putting down the legs that people have put up on their keyboard because I want to avoid the wrist extension, because that does put someone at risk for carpal tunnel. So a negative tilt is a good thing. It's hard to achieve in the workplace because your mouse often starts rolling off your work surface. So a slightly negative tilt is good. The one thing you do want to avoid is wrist extension. So yes, I like the keyboard to be flat. And then usually I find when someone hasn't put their keyboard flat, it's because the cable has come out of the channel that's in the back of the keyboard, and then it starts rocking, and their instinct is to put the legs down so it doesn't lock. What you want to do is put that cable, and you have to press hard sometimes, back into that channel, and then your keyboard will sit flat. So yes for a negative tilt. The split keyboards are interesting. There are studies on them. My only concern about them, I mean, the studies say they're better for you. My only concern is that people tend to move their elbows out. And so you want to make sure if you're using a split keyboard that your elbows are in at the side of your body. Because if you start moving your elbows out, you start stressing the shoulder, and that's going to lead to discomfort, which is probably why you were going to the split keyboard in the first place. Also, these are sort of specialty items, so you know, an employer, if it's an accommodation, may say, yes, we'll get one for you. We've had people that have come from other workplaces where they're used to a particular keyboard, so in that case, yes, you know, we can, because you used it before and you're familiar with it, you should have it here as well. But generally, I wouldn't sort of go en masse to say everybody should have those. I really don't think that that many people need them, but there are some special cases where they're definitely beneficial.
Great. We had a question about do employees, this particular person is asking specifically for Ontario, but if you had thoughts Canada-wide or any specific province that you're familiar with. She's asking if employees have the right to ask for an ergonomic evaluation in Ontario, and who would fund this assessment, and can the request be made anonymously? In other words, maybe you don't have a supportive employer who's willing to make adjustments for you.
Yeah, there's a number of answers to that. I mean, yes, there are requirements. I haven't looked at the Ontario legislation for a while, but it wouldn't be dissimilar from what I covered for BC. You do have the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board there, so when you say making the request anonymously, that's how they are structured. If you have concerns about a particular situation, you can give a call to your local WSIB office, and they will be able to explain to you both your rights and what they can do to help you. And they are able to provide some support from an ergonomics perspective, at least in getting you directed to the right resources. It becomes a little more difficult if you're a very small company, because it's hard to be anonymous. It's possible, but that's for WorkSafe to work out how they can achieve that. But generally, you would hope that most employers, a lot of these things, they're not expensive, and they can make a huge difference. And one of the arguments that I always use is looking at the cost justification for these, because if you go off because or can't work because you've got a musculoskeletal disorder of some type that's stopping you from working, that's costing the employer a lot more money than anything that is going to cost on the preventive side. So one of the reasons I really enjoyed working in return to work was the very things I was doing to make things right for someone who was returning to the workplace were exactly what we should have done to prevent some of the causes in the first place. So you know, I hope that and you shouldn't be concerned in a general sense. I don't think an employer would be upset about you saying, you know, I don't think this is right from the way this is set up, and can I have someone come and take a look? And what you might want to do, now that this webinar will be going public, you can perhaps ease your employer into an orientation about why it might be important by directing him to the CIRPD website and have them take a look and just say, well, listen, there was a webinar on this issue, and I think we would both benefit from you know, getting the benefit of some ergonomics advice.
Very good. We're running a little bit over, but I do have one more question that I think is really interesting. So if people need to leave, feel free, but we're just going to go just a couple more minutes because I'm interested in this question. Someone asked, do you see a role for voice control programs replacing some keyboarding functions in the future?
Yeah, interesting question. The voice control software has improved dramatically. In the very early days of it, you had to be very careful because you could end up with a repetitive strain injury of the vocal cord. And part of the reason for that was that you had to speak more like a computer, and it wasn't a natural way of speaking, and it made it harder on your vocal cords because of that. There's been tremendous improvements, and so I haven't heard that being voiced as a concern, pardon the pun there. I don't know. I mean, kids in school these days are learning how to keyboard, so that still may be the natural way. But it's hard to argue against technology. And you know, when you think of people like, say, we gave the example of the tablets. Well, if I just had a system where I could carry the tablet and speak, you know, my notes into a headset and have that computer typing for me, that would be pretty fantastic. So I think you'll see inroads coming in sort of specialty areas first, and then it would be up to the individual to decide. The big reason why it may not be a big seller in the offices of today is a lot of us are out in the open in our wonderful cubicles, and you know, if you had everybody speaking to their computer, it would become problematic. So I think that would be an impediment there. You know, some of the furniture manufacturers have little pods, little cocoons where, you know, if you were going to have voice-activated software and you needed to speak to your computer, you'd go into your little soundproof cocoon. So things are changing all the time, and yes, I do expect to see more use of voice-activated software. I haven't recommended it in many cases yet. Because we've usually found other workarounds. But there are some groups out there, specialty groups out there, that definitely benefit and need it and use it.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. And thank you, Dr. Wright, for the great presentation. I think that was very practical and helpful.
Thank you very much.